not really that old of a city. And so, you know, the World Heritage people, not really that interested in some part of Winnipeg as World Heritage, but old growth forest that still sustains woodland caribou herds. Not a lot of those left in the world, especially with such a large area as Poplar River and the communities in Manitoba and Ontario are talking about. So that proposal made the shortlist. When that was announced, I live in a part of the city called Wolseley, and the Manitoba Hydro offices are about 7 or 8 blocks away from me. I like to say you could hear the gnashing teeth in their office. They were so frightened because they had this plan for a hydro line down through that territory, and suddenly they knew it was going to be a lot harder. The reason why I tell that story is there's an initiative going on in the bush country today called the Boreal Forest Initiative. Some environmental groups have signed on to an agreement with a few First Nations to say we'll protect some parts of the forest and we'll let the other parts of the forest go to logging. Now, most of the grassroots activists that I work with have condemned that agreement. David Suzuki Foundation is involved with it actually, and they've criticized Suzuki, saying yes, there's a couple of Aboriginal communities who've signed on, but most of the First Nations whose land is affected haven't been consulted, aren't a part of this agreement. Most of the forest is still going to be cut up. It's just become a little kind of token. Oh yes, we're saving these areas we plan to save anyway, so that we can cut down the rest of it. Poplar River is one of the First Nations that signed on to that agreement. So in fact, they're providing a little bit of First Nations cover for it. And it points to sort of the problem of, I respect Poplar River. Sophia Rabliaskis, who won the Goldman Prize, is a hero to me as well. They're doing what they can do for their community and their area. They're getting resources from the Boreal Forest Initiative, and that's one of the ways in which they're making their dream come true. It's hard for people in those circumstances to be able to say, well, maybe we shouldn't be signing on to this because there are other Aboriginal communities out there that we're not even related to that are going to have a hard time if this gets passed. Right? They're just on the ground trying to do the best thing for their community. So the isolation of northern rural Aboriginal communities poses very specific problems about what they can do in terms of what they want to achieve and what resources are available to them, and how they can form links of solidarity, we might say, or see a larger picture going beyond their own community's interest with other communities. We're developing this organization called Defenders of the Land. I'm not its leader by any stretch. I sit in on conference calls. I'd say Art Manuel and Russell Diabo and Muriel Lafointe from ARDOC are kind of among the people who've been very active and taking a leadership role in it, and trying to figure out how communities can coordinate, what kind of demands they can set, and what kind of change they can put in place. The fact is, the kind of wealth that still exists in northern communities, is never understood by governments or by people outside those communities. And don't get me wrong, there is real poverty. There's a housing crisis. There are people who didn't grow up with traditional knowledge, who aren't hunters, who don't go out on their own land, who don't have very much of a future in most of those communities. But there's also a strength in those communities, in the hunting families, a strength that's totally ignored. All of the community development work that goes on in those communities doesn't look at the strengths and say, let's build from the strengths that are there. They always go in with all those poor Aboriginal people, need our help, we'll go in and help them. There's high suicide rates, there's all these other problems, so clearly they don't have a clue about what they're doing. They never go into it saying, there are some problems, but there are also some strengths. And if actually we're going to do something meaningful and long-term in those communities, we need to think about working with, building from the strengths that are there. The strengths that are there are in the hunting families, and in any northern community where the land hasn't been destroyed, there are at least a few families that look very, very poor to our eyes, but are respected and known in the community, where people are making the best living they can off the land. And sometimes the best living off the land that they can make is better than, it's called the good life in Cook, the Matsi, or in Inuktitut, I'm slowly learning the Inuktitut language, Inusatiava, the good life. You can have a good life without a fancy 20-inch, 24-inch, 48-inch plasma color TV set, and without all of the things that are advertised on television. They go actually, as I mentioned, I remember, and what Rodney was saying reminded me of this. I remember sitting on his doorstep while he's having a smoke and the sun comes out and he's trying to convince his son to quit school. And you know, I go to town, I'm always telling people, come to university, it's better than high school, you know, you have your freedom there. And I was listening to convince his son to quit school, and I thought, you know, it was a real wake up for me. So Rodney's way ahead of me on this one. Because it was like, he's right. If his son can learn to live the life that he's living, he'll have a way better life than even if he could get his PhD and become a professor and walk around with a crown on his forehead worrying about the state of the world and properly or all those sorts of things. So maybe the last thing that I guess I want to say to you here is, you know, I grew up with shame from being poor. Because in our society, you're taught that if you're not at the top, it's because it's your fault. And you grow up bearing that every single day. And it's actually the reason why I'm a Marxist, is because it's reading Marx, you know, this old, dead, white male philosopher. Marx taught me kind of in my body that I wasn't responsible for what had happened to me. It wasn't my dad. My dad wasn't any worse than anybody else, much better than anybody else. That what happens to me is the capitalist world needs it. It needs people unemployed. It needs people poor. It needs people desperate. It wants people desperate. It wants people desperate enough that they'll compete for the meager wages that they'll throw, or the small change that they'll throw from their carriages. You know, once watching a Blue Jays baseball game, I saw someone in one of those little fancy boxes throwing $20 bills out the window and letting it float to the crowd below. And I watched people, you know, paying for seats at a baseball game, so they weren't poor. They were scrambling over each other to try and grab these $20 bills. That's the society we live in. The settler colonial state in Canada, I said I hate Canada because it doesn't give people dignity. And especially if you're poor, there's no dignity. I had to start, you know, I went to university and I was like, I don't belong. They're going to find me out and toss me out. I went to graduate school, it's like, okay, now they're finally going to find me out and toss me out. You know, now I'm a tenured full professor. They don't like me, but they're stuck with me, so I don't worry about them throwing me out. But it took a long, long time to get there. But if there's anything I can say to people is you own the ground you walk on. And the richest person in the world can't take it away from you unless you let them. Don't let them. Don't let them. Calamity palette,